Welcome to Win the Future, a podcast where we chat with folks who are tackling the most significant challenges our communities face today to make for a better tomorrow. I'm your host, Brett Broster. This is episode number 7. Hey everyone, welcome to Win the Future. I am here today with the one, the only DeVaughn Ward, who is senior counsel to the Marijuana Policy Project.
Yes, sir.
And a lawyer extraordinaire. And we worked together in Hartford back in the day.
Yeah. We worked for the capital city for a time, and that's how we met. And man, we've been friends ever since, man. So
yeah,
thanks for having me.
Oh my God, thanks for being on. So let's talk pot.
Yeah, let's talk. A lot has happened in the past week.
Let's recap what happened from Tuesday from the election. At least there was an outcome in that election.
I apologize if I miss any states, but at Marijuana Policy Project, Senior Legislative Counsel, I cover Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania as my coverage areas in my portfolio. But being part of a national organization, MPP, Marijuana Policy Project, has been around for 25 years. And they are the largest marijuana reform organization in the United States. And they've been instrumental in adult use legalization campaigns. They led the campaign in Massachusetts. They led the campaign in Illinois. So they're the policy nerds who really know this stuff in and out. And so with that said, you asked me what's changed since Tuesday. Montana went legal, South Dakota went legal, and New Jersey went legal. And then a handful of other states had medical bills that went too. Don't ask me. I don't want to misstate which ones, but a couple of other states approved medical too. But the big wins out of the night were South Dakota, Montana, and New Jersey. And so what that means is a lot of folks think that with New Jersey, now that they've legalized, it's going to set off kind of a race on the East Coast for who's next between New York, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania.
Interesting. So what's the landscape now in New England for marijuana legalization?
So just this past year, Vermont had legalization, but they didn't have the sale component. They didn't have a sales apparatus. So like you could possess it, you could grow your own, but there were no dispensaries. There wasn't any sale apparatus. So Vermont finally approved sales. So they're going to start sales sometime soon. Maine's another state that had medicinal but didn't have sales. Maine sales started in October as well. And then Massachusetts has been up and running since 2018. And so the outliers, I guess the only ones who haven't legalized in New England are New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island.
Interesting. So with Connecticut, how does the landscape look going into the 2021 session?
In February of 2020, Governor Lamont proposed a bill, SB 16, and it was the first time the governor had put forth a legalization proposal. It had support from the then Speaker of the House and the Senate President. It got a hearing. The bill got a hearing in the Judiciary Committee. Really positive reception, and then COVID happened and shut down the entire Capitol, and the entire legislative session got scrapped. So for the 2021 session, where I would imagine, and Governor Lamont said as much publicly, that he's gonna propose a legalization bill. He'd like to have some collaboration with New York. So I think we're still trying to figure out what it looks like. But I believe from talking to a couple of folks in the administration that it's going to probably build on or look very close to what he proposed last year. And so the way the bill worked that he proposed last year was almost a two-phase approach, where step one would be legalizing marijuana. So basically you pass the bill, and then let's say he passes it in the 2021 session. So let's say hypothetically you pass in 2021 session, which ends in June. July 1st, 2021, marijuana is legalized in Connecticut, which means, no one's going to jail for possession. No one's going to jail for having traces of THC in, their system, for if they're on parole or probation. Cops can no longer, arrest somebody or even search somebody's vehicle because they smell marijuana. All those things happen, once marijuana is legalized. But the bill also in addition to doing legalization, it set up this equity commission that really looked at, how do we take the revenue from this industry that, communities of color and urban communities have borne the brunt of, and use that revenue to create economic opportunity and to invest in some of these communities that have been ravaged by the war on drugs. And so that question is a really complicated question. So what the bill did is it set up this equity commission that has a bunch of different folks on it to come together to kind of really figure out what Connecticut's marketplace looks like and how do we address the social equity piece here in Connecticut. And then they come back in 2022, make those recommendations to the legislature turns them into law, and then hopefully legal sales start either late 2022 or early 2023. So it's almost like a two-tiered approach, and I'm hearing that's kind of how the governor is looking to do it. I'm not sure if the other consideration is to try to do maybe a bill where it all gets it done in one shot. You legalize and you set up the framework, and under that model, you generate the most revenue very quickly. But there's other ways to generate revenue and do everything. So it's still kind of a gray area where we're in November now. It's still unclear exactly how the administration is going to go forward with legalization, but we do know that they're going to put a legalization proposal on the table for certain. So,
and with that, revenue obviously is becoming an issue not only for the state but for municipalities in Connecticut. Can you talk a little bit about what legalizing marijuana might bring to the state?
Yeah. So, funny you mentioned that. MPP, the organization I work for, just teamed up with UConn and the Connecticut Center for Economic Analysis, and we did a study on the economic impact of legalization here in Connecticut. And what the study found is over a 5-year period, from direct and indirect tax revenue. So when I say indirect tax revenue, I mean realtors, accountants, lawyers, the folks who will be dealing with the folks in the industry. The tax revenue that they generate from this new industry, plus the direct tax revenue from the actual sales, could generate around upwards of $970 million by year 5 in revenue for the state. And then in Governor Lamont's bill before, municipalities were allowed to level up to a 3% point of sales tax. So UConn projected that by year 5, municipalities could generate as much as 21 million by year 5. And so, that's significant, for, even you think about, our former, the place where we used to work, Hartford, right? If Hartford could generate, 3 million in municipal revenue from marijuana sale, that's real money, right? And that's money that you could use, to build schools or fix your roads or do anything you want with. And so it's really significant here in Connecticut because, municipalities don't have anything but the property tax. So it's really an interesting model to try to give municipalities some more ways to generate revenue.
Definitely. And let's talk about, sometimes when revenue projections are talked about for doing one thing or another, it doesn't come to fruition, but marijuana is one of those that has proven to be extremely effective and even beat projections in a place like Colorado.
So actually on election day, Massachusetts came out and said they've hit $1 billion in sales. And so, a lot of places have exceeded their expectations in terms of the demand for this new market, right? And so that's why I really think Connecticut has such an opportunity to get into the marketplace, get in early, really establish itself as a leader in this industry, because this industry is going to happen no matter what, right? And it's other states are taking advantage of the jobs and the revenue, and so I really think that, it's an opportunity for the state.
Definitely. And so Vermont and Maine being the two other New England states that have legalized, can you talk a little bit about what that looks like compared to Massachusetts?
Well, yeah. So the tax structures are probably a little different in terms of what they're taxing. But, Vermont, they had legalization, but, Vermont is a quiet state, not a popular state. So they were really heavy on the homegrown piece. And so they took want to say maybe 2 or 3 years to actually do the sales piece, which they just finalized, like I think in October, so a month ago. And then Maine, same thing. They had medicinal, but they just decided to take the leap and do adult sales. So I don't know the tax rates off the top of my head, but it's really encouraging to see kind of like this landscape kind of shaping up in New England, because New England has some really good producers of some really great products. Not just and this is the thing I tell people, that the marijuana industry for older folks, the marijuana industry that you may have known in the 90s or the 80s, like the pot you were buying from like in college and high school, it's not the same. It's not even the same game, right? In that if you were somebody who maybe experimented in college or in high school, and you had a bad experience, or it was it's almost the equivalent of like you trying tequila in high school and then saying I'm swearing off all alcohol before you've even had like a nice Merlot, right? There's really something I think in this industry for everybody, whether it's CBD for folks who have joint pain and muscle pain, whether it's tinctures for folks who don't smoke, and would like a nice sativa or something to help them concentrate, or someone who again doesn't smoke but who enjoys a cookie or a candy bar before bed to help them with sleep, and then there's just folks who enjoy using flour or any of the other products. So there's really something I think for everybody. And I think there's so many different strands, there's so many different products, and I think the thing is really folks have to really know that landscape exists, and then try some things out and see what works for you individually, because and that's another thing too. It's like I compare it to alcohol. It's like saying I tried tequila back in college and I had a really bad experience and I hated it. But you may actually be a really avid Merlot drinker, and I like to think of like the different strands the same way. Maybe you had a bad experience with a really high-end sativa one time, but you're really somebody who really enjoys an indica, or really somebody who enjoys a hybrid blend of both, right? And so I think this is really, I like to make the analogy between alcohol, because that's kind of something everybody can understand. But the reality is, marijuana is a lot less harmful than alcohol to your body. You can't die from too much marijuana consumption. You can die from too much alcohol consumption. But there's really something in this industry for everybody, and so I'm really excited for folks to kind of tap into this new industry.
No, that's great. Well, DeVaughn, we're just going to take a quick commercial break, and then we're going to come back for the second component of DeVaughn Ward here with Win the Future. Win the Future is sponsored in part by Connecticut by the Numbers. Welcome back to Win the Future with our guest today, DeVaughn Ward, and we're talking pot. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between recreational versus medical.
So Connecticut's had a medical program since let's say 2015. Connecticut's had a medical program, and the process with that is that you have to be certified by a medical provider. So, a APRN nurse or a doctor can certify you for a prescription. And then you apply for a license from the Department of Consumer Protection. Once you receive your temporary license, you have to register to a particular dispensary, and then you can go to the dispensary and purchase products. Now, with adult use, you don't have all those steps before. You can just walk into any dispensary and purchase any product. And so, there are 35 states plus DC that have medical programs, and there are 15 states plus DC that have legalization, so adult use programs. Most adult use programs around the state are 21 plus, just like alcohol. So you can't purchase products. There are some medical programs though that have like tough restrictions. So like Hawaii, which is a state that's near and dear to me because I was born there. They just authorize edibles. So and Hawaii's had one of the longest medical programs in the country. They were one of the first states to adopt a medical program. I think as early as 2000. But they didn't have edibles, and they just authorized edible forms of products for their medical program in Hawaii. And another cool feature, some states for their medical program, they have reciprocity, right? Hawaii is a state that has reciprocity, meaning so if you come from the East Coast and you vacation in Hawaii, you register, you pay a fee, and you can purchase at their medical dispensaries as long as you show them you have a valid permit from another state. Connecticut, I don't think has reciprocity with any of their states. So that's something, right? Like, so let me back up a bit. So in addition to doing a legalization bill, MPP is likely going to be pushing for a medical update as well here in Connecticut, because things like that, reciprocity, just really best practices in terms of medical programs in the industry. Connecticut, since we passed our program a couple years ago, we haven't done a reboot to kind of recognize some of the realities in the marketplace and what other states are doing. And so I think we can try to do some of those things here next year.
Nice. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between having a program go through as a legislative measure versus a ballot initiative.
Sure. So there's only been two states that have authorized legalization or adult use programs through legislature, and those are Vermont and Illinois. And Illinois is, prior to Tuesday, was the most recent state to legalize. The rest of the states, the rest of the 13 or so states, have all done it from a ballot referendum or a ballot initiative. And so the difference is when you do it through the legislative process, it allows you the process to really flesh out the details in terms of what the marketplace looks like, what the infrastructure looks like, set the tax rate, et cetera. And the social equity piece, making sure, that the money generated from this industry, it allows for people who may have had prior convictions for marijuana or folks of color who may have lacked access to the industry because of capital, or folks from, urban communities that have been, disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. You can account for some of those things when you do it through a legislative process and really flesh all those things out prior to. When you do a ballot initiative like New Jersey just did and Montana just did, the question is really just whether the state, residents want to engage in this particular industry. And then after that, they have to go in and do the hard work. So like, for instance, in New Jersey, they legalize, they voted to legalize on Tuesday, but it wasn't a self-authorizing ballot initiative. So they're going to have to go back in soon, and they're starting their work on Monday. They're going back in to actually develop what the marketplace is going to look like. And in the interim, they actually have a couple decriminalization bills in the interim. So while they're trying to figure out what the marketplace is going to look like in the actual structure of what the market in New Jersey looks like in terms of how many dispensaries, who can sell, the tax rate, social equity, while they're looking at that, you want to make sure folks aren't still being incarcerated for possession, for having THC in their system if they're on parole or probation, if they live in public housing, not being able to be, kicked out of their public housing for use or for a conviction. All those things, they're not self-authorizing just by a ballot initiative. And so in New Jersey, for instance, the legislature is going back in and doing all those things. And so that's kind of the difference is, in my opinion, when you do it legislatively, you kind of get it all done in one fell swoop. You take some of those policy considerations, you flesh them out, and then, you pass a bill. But it's tough to do, right? It's tough to do it that way because, in states that have tried to do it that way, you run into the issue when you're answering almost two questions. It's not only a question of if we want to do this, it's the question of what does it look like, right? So like when you do it by ballot initiative, you kind of get that first question out the window that, hey, the residents want to do this, citizens want to do this. And then the next question is, okay, well, what does it look like? How do we set it up? And sometimes when you have those two questions at once in a legislative session, it could be a poison pill.
And then the decriminalization component, how has that looked in states across the country?
Connecticut has decrim. We've had decrim since, I want to say 2011 here in Connecticut. And so it's decriminalized, which means, you're not going to prison for small personal use amounts of marijuana. It's simply an infraction. You get a ticket. And so we've had that here in Connecticut since 2011, up to 1.5 ounces. But Virginia and Maryland which were the two most recent states to decriminalize. In Virginia and I think Maryland, they did up to 2 ounces. New York is up to 2 ounces. In New Jersey on Monday, I was talking about their decrim bill after they voted to legalize. They have a decrim bill that proposes to decriminalize up to 2 pounds. So, more than, what folks would consider a personal consumption amount. But I think the way I look at it is like, no one, if you want to buy 5 handles of Budweiser, right, no one's looking at you crazy, right? Yeah. And so, kind of, again, that analogy between marijuana and alcohol, if somebody has, 2 pounds of pot, like, is it really the end of the world? Yeah. Probably not. So New Jersey has a proposal to decriminalize up to 2 pounds. But really around in the New England region, the decrim for the states that do have decriminalization, it's 2 ounces is about par for the course. So Connecticut's actually a little bit behind, the rest of the region because we only have up to an ounce and a half. So yeah.
And then what do you think marijuana policy looks like at the federal level during a Biden administration?
They've committed to decriminalization, which means, folks on the federal level are no longer going to prison for possessing marijuana. And they've also committed to rescheduling. So, right now, marijuana is a Schedule II, which means it has no medical or scientific properties or ability. And rescheduling it would essentially lift the federal prohibition. So once it's rescheduled, you could see a federal marketplace like other industries, like for instance, like produce, where we ship produce from places where they can grow it all year round to places where they can't. So like oranges from Florida or California, you'll see marijuana pretty much the same way, where you're buying it in places like Oregon that can grow it all year round and grow great product and sending it to the East Coast. And so I believe that the Biden administration and the Harris administration, Biden-Harris administration, I would take them at their word that they want to do decrim. Kamala, Vice President Harris has hopefully learned some lessons from her time in California, and also she brings the experience of having seen when you legalize or you decriminalize, it's not the end of the world, and so that I think is another thing when you're talking about the landscape, changing with Vermont and Maine and Massachusetts now going into its 3rd year of adult sales, is some of the arguments that folks had for voting against legalization, like, you're just going to have, a bunch of potheads roaming the streets high and people getting in all sorts of accidents and people selling at schools. And it just hasn't come to fruition in places like Colorado or Oregon. Colorado, actually, they're consistently ranked as one of the best economies in the country. They have one of the highest GDP rates in the country. And then, you don't even have to look to Colorado. You can look at Massachusetts, just over the border here in Connecticut, and you could see the sky hasn't, fallen out because they've decided to go ahead with legalization. So, I think in a Biden-Harris administration, her being able to draw off those lessons in California, and in her experience with criminal justice reform, where I think the marijuana industry is anxiously and anticipating them being in office and being able to move this issue forward, right? There's a ton of things on the federal level that the federal prohibition is kind of prevented. Like, right now, every marijuana business around the country is cash, which is a huge security risk and presents its own challenges, even in terms of capitalizing a business, right? Who's lending to these guys to try to finance these businesses and get them off the ground. So, even being able to have access to banking, would be a huge win for the marijuana industry. And it looks like, at least in the Biden-Harris administration, the marijuana industry has somebody who's willing to listen, and somebody who comes from a state that has already kind of engaged in this and saw that, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah. No, understood. No, that's great. Well, DeVaughn, I don't want to take up more of your time, but I can't thank you enough for being here.
We can talk pot all night, man.
I like it. What are any last words you want to give to our viewers about the future?
I would say, if you have a chance, please check out mpp.org. We recently did a candidate survey for everybody who was running in the 2020 election, just to get where they stood on the issue, and look up your legislator, whoever won your race the other day. Look up your legislator, see where they are on the issue of legalization, and if they're not where you want them to be, give them a ring and call them up and say, hey, this is something I'm in favor of. I'm a constituent of yours. Because that's one of the biggest impediments here in Connecticut, is that legislators are like trepidatious. They don't really know how their constituents feel about the issue, and they don't want to get too ahead of them. So, the more feedback I think some legislators hear that there are people, citizens, constituents in their district who support this issue, I think the better. So I would say, folks watching, folks listening, that, find out where your legislator stands on the issue, and if you're supportive, contact them and let them know.
DeVaughn Ward, Senior Counsel for the Marijuana Policy Project. Overall, great guy. Can't thank you enough for being here.
Oh, happy anytime, man.
Oh, well, appreciate it. We're definitely hoping to have you back. Yeah. And thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of Win the Future. And please stay tuned next Thursday for another episode. Thank you for listening to the Win the Future podcast, sponsored by the strategic communications firm, A Better Campaign. Make sure to visit our website at abettercampaign.com/win the future. Please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts, and share it with your friends. Thank you for tuning in. Please tune in again next Thursday for another episode of Win the Future.